When the HOA president boxed in his ranch and slapped a lock on the only gate, everyone figured Anthony Ridley would cave. They were wrong. Anthony had seen storms flatten fences before, but never one like this. Because this storm wasn't made of wood or wire. It was made of bylaws, arrogance, and a padlock that didn't even belong to him. Early one March morning, coffee steaming in his hand, he stepped onto his porch and froze. A brand new fence, gleaming, cold, ran across his property line. It wasn't his. It wasn't even on his land. And at its center stood the only way in or out, a steel gate, chained and locked beneath a sign that read, "Property access managed by Lakeside Meadows HOA." Anthony set his mug on the railing, eyes narrowing. His cattle grazed in the pasture beyond, penned in like exhibits at a zoo. The old access road to the county highway lay just beyond the gate. But the only key? It belonged to Marjorie Kane, the HOA president. Marjorie Kane, sharp suits, sharper heels, and a reputation that cut deeper than barbed wire. Anthony had only been here 6 weeks. He left Amarillo behind, its traffic, its noise, dreaming of wide skies and honest work. At 46, with calloused hands and a back that still throbbed from the last calving season, he had saved every dime to buy this spread. He wanted quiet mornings, the rhythm of ranch life, cattle lowing against the wind. What he hadn't counted on was a homeowners association, let alone one bold enough to fence him in. By the time he strode down to the gate, 2 men in HOA polo shirts were tightening bolts. "Morning," Anthony called, keeping his voice steady. "Mind telling me what this is?" Neither looked up. One muttered, "Talk to the board." And then she arrived. A spotless silver SUV rolled up, tires crunching on gravel. Out stepped Marjorie Kane, sunglasses perched high, clipboard tucked under her arm. "Mr. Ridley," she said coolly, skipping any greeting. "You've been notified of your non-compliance issues." Anthony frowned. "Non-compliance with what?" She didn't miss a beat. "Perimeter fencing must match community standards. Yours does not. Until it's corrected, this remains in place. This measure will prevent further violations," Marjorie said. Anthony swept a hand toward the fence line, where his cattle clustered uneasily. "Violations? That's my access road. My herd needs water from the creek down there. And that," he jabbed a finger toward the gate, "isn't even your land." Marjorie's smile was thin, polished. "The access easement is under HOA control, Mr. Ridley. It's in the covenant you signed when you bought the property." His stomach tightened. He remembered the mountain of papers at closing, the legal jargon no one but a lawyer could untangle. "You mean to tell me you can just lock me in until I comply?" "Exactly," she said simply. Then, with a turn of her heel, "Contact our office when you're ready to discuss approved fencing styles. Have a pleasant day." The gate clanged shut. The lock clicked. And Marjorie's silver SUV purred away, leaving dust and silence in her wake. The 2 workers finished tightening bolts, avoided eye contact, and left. Anthony stood there for a long moment, hands on his hips, the morning breeze tugging at his shirt. He battled drought, stubborn cattle, and rising feed prices, but never arrogance like this. That night, he sat at his kitchen table across from Glenn Porter, his neighbor, a retired trucker who'd lived in Lakeside Meadows for 2 decades. "They've been pulling this stunt for years," Glenn said, nursing a cup of coffee. "Marjorie's got the whole board wrapped around her finger. If she don't like you, she'll make your life hell." Anthony shook his head. "I didn't move out here to get pushed around by a committee." "Then you'd better be ready for a fight," Glenn said flatly. "She won't hand over that key unless you play her game." Anthony leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't sure how far this would go, but he knew one thing. He wasn't giving in. The land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was his dream, his work, his future. The next morning, he drove into town, bought a thick file folder, and began collecting everything: letters, photos, every scrap of paper tied to his property. If Marjorie wanted a fight, she'd get one. But he had no idea how personal, or how public, that fight was about to become. 2 days later, Anthony walked through the glass doors of the Lakeside Meadows clubhouse for his first official HOA meeting. The clubhouse conference room smelled faintly of stale carpet and burnt coffee. Every seat was filled, neighbors pressed shoulder to shoulder, murmuring until the meeting was called to order. At the front, 6 board members sat behind a folding table stacked with papers. At the center, commanding attention in a navy blazer and a necklace that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, sat Marjorie Kane. She didn't look at the audience, she looked at Anthony. "Mr. Ridley," she said into the microphone before the meeting had even begun. "You'll be addressed under compliance matters." For 40 long minutes, Anthony endured talk of shrub heights, pool hours, and a dispute over mailbox colors. He flipped through the thick packet they'd handed him, pages of rules dictating paint swatches, driveway lengths, even acceptable lawn ornaments. It was a world away from ranching. Finally, his name was called. He rose, boots striking the floor with steady echoes as he walked to the front. The room quieted. "Let's discuss your fence," Marjorie began, her tone clipped. Anthony drew in a slow breath. "That fence is the same I've used for years on my previous property. It's sturdy, safe, and it keeps my cattle in." Marjorie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Functional isn't the standard here. Our community requires uniform aesthetics. Yours does not comply." Anthony set a thick folder on the table and opened it with deliberate calm. "This isn't a golf course. It's a cattle ranch. My fencing isn't meant to look pretty from the street. It's meant to do its job." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Rules are rules, sir. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make one for everyone." Anthony's gaze locked on him. "You already do. I drove past 3 houses in this neighborhood with fencing that doesn't match yours. None of them have padlocks on their gates." A murmur rippled through the audience. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Marjorie's lips tightened. "Those cases are under review," she snapped. "Meanwhile, you remain out of compliance. Fines will continue until your fencing meets standards." Anthony leaned forward, voice low but firm. "How about the fact that your fence blocks my access to the creek, my cattle's water source? You're not just enforcing rules. You're interfering with my ability to care for my animals. That's dangerous." Marjorie didn't flinch. "We've confirmed you have other water sources. Satellite imagery proves it." Anthony barked a humorless laugh. "Satellite imagery? You think a photo from space can tell you how I run my ranch?" The room stirred again, whispers growing louder. From the second row, Glenn Porter raised his hand. His voice carried, steady and measured. "Marjorie," he said, "the man's been here barely 2 months. Maybe give him a little time to adjust before slapping him with locked gates and fines." For the first time, Marjorie's composure wavered. "And fines," Marjorie finished, not even glancing at Glenn. "The HOA must maintain standards, Mr. Porter. If Mr. Ridley wants to be part of this community, he follows the same rules as everyone else." Anthony lifted his folder. "And if I don't?" Her voice stayed cool, but her eyes cut sharp. "Then fines continue. And if necessary, legal action." Anthony shut the folder, jaw tight. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his seat. On the outside, he looked composed. Inside, his frustration burned. When the meeting adjourned, a few neighbors slipped up to him. Quick handshakes, murmurs of support, always with nervous glances toward Marjorie. Others avoided him entirely. It was clear, her grip on this community was stronger than the title of president alone explained. Outside, in the dimly lit parking lot, Glenn caught up. "She's not just strict," he muttered. "She's got friends on the county zoning board. Cousin in real estate too. Folks think twice before crossing her." Through the glass doors of the clubhouse, Anthony spotted Marjorie shaking hands with a tall man in a tailored suit, both smiling like partners who'd just sealed a deal. Anthony's voice was low, steady. "I'm not playing her game. If she wants a battle, I'll bring one she's not ready for." What he didn't yet know was how far Marjorie would go to keep her grip on power, or how high the cost would climb for both of them. By the following week, Anthony's mailbox looked more like a courthouse filing cabinet. Every morning brought a fresh envelope stamped HOA compliance office across the front. The first notice fined him $50 a day. The next raised it to $100. Each letter sounded more hostile than the last. The wording grew absurd. Your fence constitutes a visual inconsistency detrimental to community appeal. Anthony read it aloud in his kitchen, his voice thick with disbelief. Visual inconsistency. I'm raising cattle, not hosting weddings. Across the table, Glenn sipped his black coffee, shaking his head. They know exactly what they're doing. They'll bleed you till you fold, or until you're too broke to fight back. That evening, Anthony made a decision. He'd attend the next HOA meeting, not to argue, but to watch. To learn. The more he understood their tactics, the better chance he had of finding a crack in their armor. The clubhouse was crowded again, but the atmosphere was different this time, thicker, charged. At the podium, a woman Anthony hadn't seen before, Paula Green, was in mid-sentence, her voice trembling with frustration as she described how the HOA forced her to cut down a healthy tree. Her eyes flicked to Anthony, recognition sparking, but she quickly looked away and finished her complaint. When the agenda shifted to compliance, Marjorie's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Anthony. She didn't call his name. Instead, she listed other violations: an RV overstaying in a driveway, a shed painted the wrong color, a porch light too bright. Each citation delivered in the same crisp, detached tone, clinical, efficient, and always backed by the unspoken threat of escalation. Afterward, in the parking lot, Paula approached him. You're Ridley, right? The rancher with the fence? That's me, Anthony said. Her expression hardened. They're going to grind you down until you either give up or move out. Marjorie's been doing this for years. She doesn't care who you are. She only cares about winning. Anthony studied her. Then why does everyone let her keep winning? Paula's answer came quietly, almost like a confession. Because most folks don't want trouble. And Marjorie knows how to make trouble feel expensive. Her words stayed with him. It wasn't about fences or paint colors. It was about fear. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. It was enforcing control. And by refusing to bow, Anthony realized he was drawing a line of his own. The next morning, he picked up the phone. I'm requesting mediation, he told the woman at the HOA office. I want to sit down with the board and work out a compromise. When mediation day came, Anthony walked into the room prepared. Photographs of his cattle, maps of his land, meticulous documentation of every letter and conversation. Across from him sat Marjorie, cool and poised, flipping through a slim binder as if she already knew the ending. Mr. Ridley. The mediator began, voice even. The HOA is willing to waive part of your fines, if you agree to replace your fence within 60 days. Anthony shook his head slowly. That's not a compromise. That's just your demand with a discount. Marjorie cut in smoothly. We're being generous here, Mr. Ridley. Most people don't get this kind of consideration. Anthony leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. Most people don't have their animals trapped behind a locked gate. This isn't about a fence, it's about my livelihood. And you're standing in the way of it. The mediator shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy. Let's try to focus on practical options. The practical option, Anthony snapped, is you give me back access to my own road and stop acting like it's some kind of favor. Marjorie's smile was thin, her eyes unreadable. We'll be in touch. She rose from her chair, already turning toward the door. The meeting ended without resolution. That night, Anthony sat on his porch long after the sun disappeared, the dark field stretching around him. He could hear the low, restless calls of his cattle drifting on the wind. The line had been drawn. Neither side would cross it. Not willingly. What he didn't yet know was that the fight was about to leave the shadows of paperwork and fines, and explode into something public, and far more dangerous. The breaking point came on a windy Thursday morning. Anthony had been up since dawn repairing a pump near the north pasture. As he made his way toward the creek, he noticed the herd clustered near the new perimeter fence, agitated, hooves stirring dust as they paced. He followed their gaze and froze. The creek was gone to them, completely fenced off. The new barrier didn't just block the access road anymore. It had sealed off the only reliable water source on that side of the property. Anthony dropped his gloves in the dirt. His boots hit hard as he swung over the fence. On the other side, the locked gate stood like a provocation, its steel shackle gleaming in the morning light. He grabbed it and rattled it hard. The clang echoed across the empty pasture. No answer. No movement. Just silence. By mid-morning, his patience had burned out. He was back on the phone with the HOA office, his voice like gravel. "I need access to that creek, immediately." Anthony gripped the phone tighter. "My cattle can't be cut off from water. This is basic animal welfare." The receptionist's tone was clipped. "Mr. Ridley, the HOA has confirmed there are other water points on your property. Those tanks are back up," he snapped. "In a heat wave, they won't last a week. Do you want to be responsible for dead cattle? I can forward your concern to the board," she said, bored and unmoved. "But I cannot authorize access." By late afternoon, Anthony's patience was gone. He drove straight to Marjorie Kane's house. Her place was picture-perfect. Freshly painted siding, hedges clipped to razor precision, not a leaf on the walk. She opened the door in a pale blue blouse, her smile polite but guarded. "This isn't about fines anymore," Anthony said, voice steady but edged with steel. "It's about my herd. You're cutting them off from water." Marjorie's reply came smooth, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Ridley, the HOA operates under a uniform standard. If we make exceptions, we undermine the integrity of the community." "The integrity of the community?" His voice rose. "We're talking about cattle, living creatures that depend on me to keep them alive." Her expression never wavered. "Rules are rules." Anthony stepped back, fists clenched at his sides. He forced the words through gritted teeth. "This isn't over, Marjorie." As he turned down her walk, he caught movement behind her curtains, neighbors watching. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was a spectacle. 2 days later, stress showed in the herd. Cattle stood bunched at the fence, bawling toward the creek. Anthony hauled in extra water tanks, the backbreaking work bleeding time and money. Glenn showed up one afternoon, leaning against the truck as they wrestled another tank into place. "She's playing hardball," he said. "Trying to wear you down until you fold. She's not getting it," Anthony replied, wrench in hand. "I'll haul water every day if I have to. But I'm not tearing down a working fence just to satisfy her idea of aesthetics." Still, the pressure built. Anthony was running on fumes. Long nights, endless ranch chores, and a growing stack of HOA letters. One envelope included a grainy photo taken from the road, one of his tanks, tilted slightly. The letter called it a safety hazard, and ordered its removal. "That's harassment," Glenn muttered after reading it. "That's Marjorie," Anthony said flatly. Then, one morning, the game changed. A for sale sign appeared on the narrow half-acre lot that contained the locked gate. Anthony stopped in his tracks, staring at it. The gears turned fast. If he bought that strip, the gate, and the lock, would be his. But if Marjorie caught wind of his plan, she'd shut it down before the ink dried. Whatever he did, it would have to be fast. Quiet. Instead of rushing to a realtor, he drove into Abilene and stepped into the office of Tom Beard, a seasoned local attorney. The place smelled of old paper and coffee. Beard's handshake was firm, practiced. Anthony spread the letters, photos, and HOA notices across the desk. "I need to know if what they're doing is even legal. And if I buy that land with the gate, does it give me full control?" Tom adjusted his glasses, scanning carefully. His voice was measured, deliberate. "They're operating inside the covenants you signed when you bought the property," he said slowly. "That's the bad news." Tom leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger on the photo of the for sale sign. "Those covenants you signed? They're baked into the purchase agreement. They give the HOA far more control than most folks realize." Anthony crossed his arms. "And the good news? Tom tapped the sign again. If that parcel really is separate from HOA property, and it contains the only gate to your land, then yes. You'd have every legal right to control it. But you'll need to verify that before making a move. And you'll need to buy it in a way that doesn't set off alarms. Anthony's jaw tightened. Meaning Marjorie can't know it's me. Exactly, Tom said. If she catches even a whisper, she could push the seller to take a competing offer. Or worse, pull strings to rezone before the sale closes. Keep your name out of it. For the next few days, Anthony played it cool. By day, he fed cattle, hauled water, and waved politely to neighbors as if nothing had changed. By night, he sat at his kitchen table under the glow of a single lamp, sketching a plan. He called an old college buddy, Brett Lawson, who now ran a property management firm 2 counties over. Brett agreed to set up an LLC under his company's umbrella, giving Anthony total anonymity in the deal. One evening, Glenn dropped by and found Anthony hunched over a county plat map. "You're cooking something up," Glenn said with a grin. Anthony didn't deny it. "If I told you, you'd have to swear it never leaves this porch." Glenn raised a hand. "Scout's honor." Anthony laid out the plan in low, deliberate tones. By the time he finished, Glenn was grinning wider than before. "That's bold," he said. "And I like it." But Anthony wasn't the only one sensing a shift. Marjorie began appearing at the fence more often, sometimes with 2 board members trailing her. They'd stand by the gate, whispering, glancing his way like sentries guarding ground they didn't own. One afternoon, as Anthony worked on a broken post, she strode over with her ever-present clipboard. "Mr. Ridley," she said crisply, "we've scheduled another compliance inspection for next week." Anthony didn't even glance up from the post he was tightening. "Schedule whatever you like. My fence isn't changing." He drove the wrench hard, metal clanking. Then he looked up just long enough to add, "The only thing you're changing is how hard you're making this on yourself." She replied coolly, but Anthony straightened and met her gaze head-on. "And you're underestimating me." For a long beat, they locked eyes. Then Marjorie turned sharply and strode back to her SUV, heels crunching on gravel. The following morning, Anthony's phone buzzed. It was Brett. The seller accepted the LLC's offer. No counter, no questions asked. Closings in just under 3 weeks. It was the first real victory Anthony had felt in months. But Tom's warning echoed in his mind. The deal's not final until the ink's dry. Don't let your opponent know you're already holding the winning hand. Anthony agreed. Marjorie wouldn't quit until she thought she'd won. The trick was letting her believe she still held control, right up until the moment she didn't. Keeping that secret, though, in a small town? Like trying to hold water in your hands. 2 days later, Anthony drove past the lot just to check. The for sale sign still stood, one corner bent from the wind but otherwise untouched. He parked down the road and watched. The parcel was tiny, just a gravel strip, a narrow gate, and a line of mesquite at the back. But it was the choke point. Whoever owned it controlled every truck, every delivery, every visitor entering his ranch. Anthony knew if the HOA had funds or a legal claim, they'd have snatched it already. The fact they hadn't meant there was a gap, and he intended to slide through it. That afternoon, Brett called again. Title search came back clean. No liens, no disputes. Seller just wants out fast. Probably doesn't even realize the leverage he's sitting on. Anthony allowed himself a smile. Good. Let's keep it that way. The next week, he kept to his routine. No sudden trips to town. No whispered conversations with neighbors. When anyone asked about the fence, he just shrugged. We'll see how it plays out. Inside, though, he replayed the same image over and over, sliding his own key into that lock and turning it. One evening Glenn showed up with a cooler of beer, settling on the porch rail. "You've been awfully quiet," Glenn said. "That's either good news, or you're planning something dangerous." Anthony handed him a bottle. "Let's just say I'm lining things up so I don't have to ask for permission anymore." Glenn grinned. "Now that sounds like the Anthony I know." The hardest part was keeping his face unreadable when he saw Marjorie. Twice that week she drove by while he worked near the road. Each time she gave her curt wave, more gesture than greeting. Each time Anthony forced himself not to react. But inside the HOA office, something was shifting. Paula Green caught him at the grocery store one morning, voice low as she glanced over her shoulder. "I heard the board's been sniffing around that gate lot. They've talked to a surveyor. Don't know what they're planning." Anthony kept his tone calm. "Appreciate the heads up." That night, he called Brett. "We need to move faster. If they start pulling in surveyors, they'll find a way to stall, or tie it up in court." Brett didn't hesitate. "Got it. I'll push the title company. We can get you in escrow by Friday." The days leading up to it felt like a slow boil. Anthony went about his chores, but every crunch of tires on gravel snapped his head toward the road. The thought of Marjorie swooping in at the last minute gnawed at him. Friday morning, Brett called. "It's done. Escrow's open, deposits down. We're locked unless you back out, and I know you're not backing out." Anthony let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Then let's get it closed as fast as possible." That night, there was no celebrating. Instead, Anthony sat at his kitchen table, pen in hand, drafting scenarios. Once the gate was his, Marjorie would come swinging. He knew it. She could call the sheriff, threaten lawsuits, even twist the board into drafting new rules on the fly. But if the title was in his name, or at least his LLC's, none of it would matter. Ownership meant leverage. Ownership meant the fight would finally be on equal ground. What Anthony couldn't predict was how fast the tension would spike the moment the sale became public, or how sharply the community would split once the lines were redrawn. The closing landed on a gray Tuesday, the kind of sky that threatened rain but never delivered. Anthony dressed like it was any other day, worn jeans, dusted boots, a plain button-up, and drove to Abilene without a word to anyone. Brett was already at the title company, coffee in hand, papers spread across the desk. "Morning," he said with a grin. "Ready to make Marjorie's life a whole lot harder?" Anthony smirked. "Let's get it done." The process was quick. Because the LLC was listed as the buyer, Anthony's name never touched the paperwork. Brett signed where needed, slid the documents across the desk, and within an hour, it was finished. The keys, a heavy silver set on a worn leather fob, sat in the center of the table. Brett pushed them across. "They're yours." Anthony picked them up, turning the largest one in his hand. The weight wasn't just metal. It was control. For months, Marjorie had dictated when and how he could reach his own land. Now, with a single twist of this key, that power shifted. They slipped out the back door, careful not to be seen. Brett clapped him on the shoulder. "Congratulations. You just bought yourself a gate, and a fight." Back at the ranch, Anthony parked by the road and walked the last 50 yards. The gate looked the same, steel and chain, but it felt different now. It was his. He slid the key into the padlock. It turned smoothly. The shackle snapped open with a sharp crack that sounded final, like a chapter closing. He swung the gate wide and stepped back, watching as cattle wandered toward the creek for the first time in weeks. For the first time in months, he felt control return. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. On the third morning, a white SUV rolled up to the gate. Marjorie stepped out, heels clicking on gravel, clipboard in hand. 2 board members climbed out behind her. "Mr. Ridley," she said coolly, "you appear to have accessed HOA property without authorization." Anthony leaned casually on the gate. "This isn't HOA property anymore. I own this lot. County records will back me up if you don't believe me." Her eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. The association had first right of refusal." "Maybe they did," Anthony said evenly. "But they didn't use it. The seller took my offer. This gate is mine now, and I've got the paperwork to prove it." One of the board members shifted uneasily. "Marjorie, if that's true." She cut him off with a sharp glance. "We'll see about that." Turning back to Anthony, she added, "Don't think for a second this is over. We'll challenge it." Anthony didn't flinch. "Challenge whatever you want. In the meantime, you don't control this access anymore. I do. They left without another word. But the air around the ranch felt heavier, charged with storm. By that afternoon, 3 separate emails from the HOA landed in his inbox, each demanding immediate clarification of the gate's status. Anthony forwarded every HOA email to Tom. The attorney's reply never changed. Let them make the next move. By the end of the week, word had spread across Lakeside Meadows like wildfire. Neighbors Anthony barely knew stopped him at the feed store, or waved him down on back roads. Some offered quiet congratulations, almost whispering like they were afraid Marjorie might overhear. Others warned him straight up. The board was looking to make an example out of him. One evening Glenn found Anthony on the porch, boots propped on the rail, coffee steaming in his hand. "Looks like you lit a fire," Glenn said. Anthony took a slow sip. "Good. Maybe it's about time this place stopped being scared of Marjorie." What Anthony didn't yet realize was that taking control of the gate wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the opening round. And now the gloves were coming off. 2 days after Marjorie's showdown at the gate, a certified letter arrived. It claimed Anthony's purchase of the lot may constitute an encroachment on association rights, and ordered him to cease any alteration until a legal review was complete. That evening he walked it over to Glenn's place. Glenn read it once, then burst out laughing. "They're bluffing. If they thought they had a real claim, you'd already be in court." Anthony shrugged. Bluff or not, they're not backing down. By Saturday, the tension snapped. Anthony was hauling a load of feed when he spotted Marjorie at the gate, this time flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies. Their patrol trucks gleamed in the sun, blue and gold decals flashing like badges of authority. Anthony slowed, killed the engine, and rolled down his window. One deputy stepped forward. "Mr. Ridley," he said, calm but firm. "We got a call about a property dispute. We're here to keep the peace." Anthony climbed out, a folded deed in his hand. "Deputies, this is my land. This lot. This gate. Bought it fair and square, and it's on record." Marjorie folded her arms, voice sharp. "That property has always been under HOA management. He's interfering with community access." Anthony handed the deed to the deputy. The officer scanned it, then nodded. "It checks out. He owns it." Marjorie's jaw tightened. "We'll take this to court." "That's your right, ma'am," the deputy replied evenly. "But as of right now, no laws are being broken." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her SUV. The deputies followed, leaving behind a hush broken only by the lowing of cattle in the pasture. But they hadn't been alone. By the time Anthony turned back toward his truck, he saw them, neighbors gathered at the fence line, watching. Wordless. Waiting. The fight wasn't just between him and Marjorie anymore. It was spilling into the whole community. Anthony caught fragments of conversation as neighbors drifted away from the gate, some in quiet support, others muttering in Marjorie's favor. The divide was no longer hidden. It was splitting the neighborhood down the middle. That night, his phone buzzed with a text from Paula Green. "Be careful. They're holding an emergency board meeting Monday. Word is they're pushing new rules that could hit you hard." Monday arrived, and Anthony showed up early. The clubhouse was already crowded, tension so thick it felt like the air had weight. Marjorie wasted no time. "As many of you know," she began smoothly, "recent events have exposed gaps in our ability to maintain community standards. The board is therefore proposing an amendment, granting the HOA authority over any access points that serve more than one property." Anthony raised his hand. "That's a pretty convenient amendment, considering it targets one person. Me. This isn't about you, Mr. Ridley," she replied. But her eyes never left his. "It's about protecting the community as a whole." The exchange turned sharp, each point answered with a counter. Anthony argued the amendment would hand the HOA sweeping powers over land it didn't own. Marjorie pushed back with vague language about security and uniformity. When the board finally voted, the tally came down 3-2 in her favor. But the amendment couldn't take effect without a majority of homeowner votes. Afterward, several neighbors pulled Anthony aside. One of them, a wiry man named Frank Delgado, spoke in a low voice. "You're not the first person she's tried to steamroll. But you might be the first who can beat her. Keep going." By midweek, the fight had spilled onto social media. A local community page lit up with arguments, posts about the gate, the HOA, and whether Marjorie had finally gone too far. Anthony kept his own posts measured, sticking to facts and public records. But the comments told the real story. Lines were being drawn, sides chosen, like a small-town election with everything at stake. Then came the strangest twist yet. One evening, Glenn showed up carrying a plain envelope. Inside was an anonymous note: "Check the county clerk's filings tomorrow." The next day, Anthony did just that. His stomach dropped as he scanned the record. Marjorie had filed a notice of intent to purchase an adjacent strip of land running alongside his fence. If she got it, she could create an alternate access route, cutting his leverage in half. But if she thought that move would scare him, she was about to learn otherwise. Anthony had no intention of surrendering an inch, not after coming this far. The morning after he learned of Marjorie's filing, he drove straight to Tom Beard's office. The lawyer was leaning back in his chair when Anthony walked in, sunlight slanting across a desk buried in case files. "She's trying to box me in again," Anthony said, dropping the printed notice onto the desk. "If she gets that strip, she bypasses my gate completely." Tom read it carefully, then gave a slow nod. "It's a clever move, I'll give her that. But it's not a done deal. That parcel is county-owned for now, earmarked for potential utility access. She'll have to jump through a lot of hoops to get it. We can slow her down. File an objection. Demand a review of the process. Maybe even lobby the county to keep it public." "Do it," Anthony said. "Whatever it costs." Tom went to work immediately. But outside the courthouse, the fight was heating up fast. The local paper ran a front-page story: "Rancher battles HOA over locked gate." The article stayed neutral, but the photo told a different story. Anthony leaning against the gate, arms crossed, jaw set. It looked like defiance. It looked like a man who wouldn't bend. At the feed store the next morning, strangers came up to shake his hand. "Saw you in the paper," an older man said. About time someone stood up to them. Not everyone felt the same. At the grocery store, a woman wearing an HOA volunteer badge muttered as she passed, "You're making this harder for all of us." Anthony didn't bother replying. By week's end, the story had spread to talk radio. Callers argued for nearly an hour, some praising property rights, others defending the HOA's need for order. Anthony listened from his truck, surprised at how quickly his private battle had turned into a public spectacle. Then came the community barbecue. Normally, it was a small-town tradition: brisket, sweet tea, and gossip under the shade trees. This year, it felt like a campaign rally. Clusters of neighbors had gathered, some openly wearing Ridley's right pins, Glenn's handiwork, no doubt. Anthony stayed near the edge, plate in hand. But he couldn't avoid Marjorie forever. She approached with 2 board members at her side, her smile stretched thin. "Mr. Ridley," she said lightly, "enjoying the event?" "Not as much as I'd enjoy having my time back instead of dealing with all this," he answered evenly. Her smile didn't falter. "You've made your point. But the HOA will continue enforcing its rules. You'd be wise to consider the long-term consequences of this publicity." Anthony met her gaze without blinking. "You've used fear to get your way for years. That ends now." Conversations around them quieted. People turned to watch. Marjorie noticed, and shifted her tone, suddenly soft, almost conciliatory. "We can still resolve this without dragging it into court. You had that chance months ago," Anthony said. "You chose the lock instead." Her heels clicked sharply as she turned and walked away. That night, Paula called. "You know she's furious, right? She's lost control of the narrative. People aren't afraid to speak up anymore." Anthony leaned back in his chair. "Good. Maybe that's the real win here." Still, he knew it wasn't over. Marjorie was too invested to back off quietly. 2 days later, Tom called with news. Marjorie had filed a lawsuit, challenging Anthony's ownership of the gate lot, claiming procedural irregularities in the sale. But instead of fear, Anthony felt something else. Resolve, harder and sharper than ever before. By now, Anthony knew this fight wasn't just about his land. He was standing up for every neighbor who'd ever been steamrolled by the HOA and stayed quiet. The summons arrived on a Friday afternoon, a thick packet delivered by a deputy who gave him a sympathetic look. "Guess you knew this was coming," the deputy said. Anthony nodded. "Yeah, I was expecting it." Inside was page after page of legal jargon, easements, covenants, claims of undue influence. But beneath the wording, Anthony saw it for what it was, a last-ditch attempt to claw back control. The next morning, Tom flipped through the papers and shook his head. "They've got nothing solid. The sale was clean. Title's clear. They're hoping you'll get tired of fighting and settle." "I'm not settling," Anthony said firmly. Over the following weeks, the case worked its way through county court. Each hearing drew curious locals, supportive neighbors, and a handful of HOA loyalists who sat in the back, arms folded tight. Marjorie always arrived early, immaculately dressed, flanked by her bored allies. She never once looked his way. During one recess, Paula caught Anthony in the hallway. "Win or lose," she told him, "you've already changed things. People are questioning the rules now. They're not just writing checks without asking why." Anthony appreciated it, but he wasn't after moral victories. He wanted a real one. It came on a bright Tuesday morning in early summer. The judge ruled the purchase valid. The title stood. The HOA had no authority over the lot or the gate. And to make it sting worse for them, the association was ordered to cover Anthony's legal fees. When the gavel dropped, a low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Glenn, grinning from the second row, gave Anthony a thumbs up. Paula beamed. Even a few neighbors who'd stayed neutral shook his hand. Outside, reporters waited on the courthouse steps. Anthony kept his words simple. This was never about offense. It was about a principle, that you don't let someone take what's yours just because they think they can. I hope this reminds others to stand their ground. Back at the ranch, he drove straight to the gate. His cattle grazed peacefully near the creek, sunlight flashing on the water. Leaning against the fence post, he felt, for the first time in months, free of the weight on his shoulders. Glenn pulled up with 2 cold beers. Handing one over, he said, "Feels good, doesn't it?" Anthony smiled. "It's more than that. If you stand up once, maybe you give other people the courage to do the same." They sat in the shade talking about weather, cattle, and what might come next. Anthony knew Marjorie wouldn't disappear. The HOA might still try smaller games. But intimidation had limits. And he had learned something more powerful: persistence, backed by the truth, could win. Weeks later, at the next HOA meeting, he noticed a change. Board members chose their words more carefully. Neighbors asked questions without glancing nervously over their shoulders. The fear that had hung over the community for years had cracked. That, Anthony thought, was the real victory. If there was one lesson in all of it, it was simple. The moment you stop letting someone else write the rules for your life, you start living on your own terms. So if you're listening, and you've got your own locked gate, whatever form it takes, don't assume you have to accept it. Ask questions. Push back. And if the fight is worth it, don't stop until you've turned that lock with your own key. Subscribe for more real stories that remind you, your voice matters, your rights matter, and no one can fence in your life unless you let them.